In this video, we will see where an invoice is associated to a paying entity, what parameters affect that paying entity or company field, and what other functionalities are affected by the paying entity or company field. So, when we are entering an invoice, the first thing we do is we provide this entity up here. And what this is telling the system basically is this entity is the entity that's going to be paying the invoice. So what that entails is this entity is the one that's going to get the vendor payable record once the invoice is posted. And it's also the entity that's going to be provided when selecting the invoices for payment, because the cash is going to be acquired from this entity when disbursements are made. It doesn't mean necessarily that this invoice is the invoice where the cost is going to go. So when we have intercompany transactions, when one company pays for the cost incurred by another, this entity will be the paying entity, the one that incurs the cost, that is going to pay the invoice in the name of another. So the cost is incurred by another company, but the invoice is paid by this company. So this, regardless of where the cost goes, this is the entity that's going to be paying the invoice and who's going to be getting the AP offset. So the credit side of the entry, the payable to the vendor. The cost will go basically to the cost will go to the entity that we enter in the line items, but the AP offset and the vendor payable is going to go to the entity that we provide on the header. So this is where we determine who is going to pay the invoice, what company, what entity. Now you see there's a set of codes that are available here. What determines what codes are available here? The entity codes available are the ones that we have set up in the entity maintenance screen. So if we have a code that exists in the general ledger module, but it has not been set up in the screen, that code will not appear for selection here. Of course, this drives lots of functionality across the board. Anywhere where we need to select the entity, say for our open payables report, you're going to be selecting this paying entity, right? To see all the invoices that are open for it. Because remember, this is the entity that's going to owe the money to the vendor. Same story with the cash requirements. When we select, when we run cash requirements, we're going to be selecting the paying entity. So the entity that owes the money to the vendors. And that's basically it. It's very important because it drives who owes what to the vendor. And then for intercompany, this is going to be critical because in the intercompany case, the paying entity will be different from the entity that incurs the cost. So we have to be very clear. The entity at the header is the paying entity, the entity that owes the money to the vendor.